There was a time, not really that long ago, where a simple chart called a Ringleman chart was how we measured air pollution. You'd hold it up to the sky and match the shade of the air to the color on the chart. Pretty basic, and honestly a bit scary, seeing that the colors on this chart go all the way to black. Yikes! Now, the good news for us today is that a chart like this isn't very useful. We aren't seeing colors like this in the sky anymore. But the bad news is the reason why this chart isn't useful. It turns out pollutants today are so small that we can't even see them. And to make matters worse, they're small enough to enter our bloodstream and potentially damage our organs. And yet, here we are, still alive and breathing. It's as if something, somewhere, is out there watching over us and keeping us safe. Like a system of monitoring that tells us what's in our air and prevents pollutants from getting there in the first place. Yes, that is a thing. So let's find out how it works. Today, we have a clear autumn day in Vancouver, where, despite the seasonal wildfire smoke, we have some of the cleanest air in the world. Even though our population continues to grow by leaps and bounds, our air is more clean, clear, and life-sustaining every year. But this hasn't come without tremendous effort over several decades. If you could go back in time, you would be appalled at what people used to breathe in and call normal. At the turn of the century, Vancouver and its surrounding areas were booming, and the world was industrializing. This meant that density was increasing and pollution levels were rising unchecked. From the 1880s right up until the 1950s, coal was the dominant energy source. And so for cities, that meant smog, acid rain, and toxic emissions. Add to that wood stoves in homes, slash burning from forestry on the North Shore, and tons of backyard burning, and you had a suffering population and a city that was literally choking on its own growth.
Well, going way back, there's a City of Vancouver movie that actually showed people leading cars in the fog. You had to get someone out of the car to sort of lead your way.
One of the people responsible for the transition from cloudy to clear is retired Metro Vancouver manager and inspirational leader of the Air Quality Department, Barry Mills.
There's a great picture we had of the river, and it's completely black with the riverside beehive burners and smoke from unregulated incinerators and that sort of thing. In terms of foggy days that were filled with smoke, you could barely see the hand in front of you. Initially, people were complaining because dust was falling on their porch or they couldn't see something, so it was a visual issue. And it was only later when we began to analyze all of the compounds and realize the health impacts.
By the late 50s and early 60s, people began to realize that the pollution levels were not only a health hazard, but a hazard to the business of the city. What developed was a grassroots movement driven by residents and businesses that pressured officials to do more. By the 1960s, authorities began to recognize the health impacts of polluted air, and the first robust piece of legislation around air pollution came in the late 60s via the BC Health Act. Even though the original motivations were about how things looked, the result was ultimately a win for the environment and human health, and it was all part of an emerging wave of ecological awareness that was taking root around the world. At the heart of that movement was the idea that doing harm to nature was also doing harm to ourselves, and air quality concerns were high on the list. Fun fact, it was also around this time that Greenpeace was formed right here in Vancouver. Now, it was becoming clear that because air is shared across boundaries, people were going to have to work together and develop a regional approach. And so, the organization we now call Metro Vancouver was given the job.
All the municipalities of the Metro of Vancouver realized that they needed to work together. You had different municipalities doing their own thing by exception or by a planned operation like the City of Vancouver with their inspectors. And so they said, we need to work together. The tool that we have to work together is the regional district concept. That's how we've dealt with water. That's how we've dealt with sewer. And so that's the way that we work together.
With the responsibility for air quality in the hands of Metro Vancouver, policies were enacted that step by step have improved our region's air quality. Today, Metro Vancouver works diligently across 3 fronts to ensure high-quality air: monitoring, regulation, and enforcement. Monitoring is where it all starts. A vast network of high-tech sensors give us lots and lots of data on what's happening in our airshed. Here is Superintendent of Sampling and Monitoring, Ken Ree, to explain how our monitoring system works.
Metro Vancouver operates a comprehensive air quality monitoring network. We're collecting data minute by minute, hour by hour from over 30 air quality monitoring and meteorological monitoring stations in the region. They provide us with the official record of air quality data in our region. And we know that if we can measure it, then we can manage it.
Spanning the region, these stations sample the air around them, drawing it down into the devices. Inside, measurements are taken for a wide range of air contaminants.
So in the past, in the 30s, 40s, 50s, we were looking at particles in the air as being the biggest issue, or certainly the most noticeable issue. These would be visible particles, almost sort of clouds of particles in the air. Over time, that has been cleaned up, but we've also been monitoring for smaller and smaller particles. So these are the particles that you can no longer see easily in the air. So we're measuring what we call PM 2.5. So this is particles that are 2.5 microns in diameter or smaller, so about 1/30th the width of a human hair. So these are tiny particles.
In addition to PM 2.5, other invisible gases that they are monitoring for include nitrogen oxides, ozone, carbon monoxide, and sulfur dioxide. Interestingly, the tests for these all involve light or rays in some form by measuring which wavelengths of light are absorbed and which ones pass through. As infrared, ultraviolet, and fluorescent light passes through the air and are absorbed or scattered by the chemicals, this tells technicians how much of a given chemical is in the air. For PM 2.5, it's the density of the results and how much light overall gets through. So, in a way, these modern monitors are really just high-tech Ringelmann charts. All of this data collected paints a highly detailed picture of what's going on in our air. If levels of a certain pollutant are hazardous to human health and the environment over a given period of time, Metro Vancouver steps in with policies and regulations. The federal government also steps in at times to regulate certain substances or technologies at the national level. Using this monitoring system data to create policies has been instrumental to getting us to our current state of very clean air. But not everything can be controlled through regulation.
There are a number of air quality influences that come from outside our region, and there's still things that we need to deal with, but they're not ones that we can manage or control. So the major one that is impacting our region in recent times is wildfire smoke. And that's not something that we can manage, but we can be vigilant. We can be making sure that we have monitoring in the right places and providing adequate warning to the public that there is an air quality issue, providing them with advice so that they can reduce their exposure to air contaminants.
There is another form of wood smoke that is hazardous and that we do have control over, which is emissions from residential wood burning. Listen, we all love the warm feeling of a nice fire, but poorly maintained wood burning appliances and bad wood burning practices can create localized peaks of PM 2.5, which can make life difficult for the elderly, children, and those with respiratory problems.
These particles are so small that they can get into our airways and into our lungs, and because of that, they're getting into our respiratory systems as well as our bloodstream. So that has a very important impact on health. This might be residential wood burning, for example, or it could be diesel emissions from off-road equipment operating in a neighborhood. And so those are the air quality impacts that are becoming more important.
Non-road diesel emissions are a good illustration of how the enforcement aspect of Metro Vancouver's air quality work comes into play. Having the combined responsibilities of monitoring, regulating, and enforcing allowed Metro Vancouver to first see that diesel emissions were a problem, create regulations limiting their emissions, and then identify problematic sources and ultimately issue fines to the people and companies not in compliance. All this diligent attention to what we breathe over the decades is what gives us the world-class air quality that we enjoy today. Now, that doesn't mean our air is perfect. Health Canada estimates that 440 people die prematurely in our region each year due to air pollutants. But thanks to Metro Vancouver's air quality policies and regulations, as well as policies by others, 580 fewer people die prematurely each year compared to 24 years ago. So even if we have moved into an era of invisible dangers, we can skip the Ringelmann chart and check out resources like airmap.ca for a more nuanced and up-to-date picture of what's happening. And now, you know how it works.